Hello and welcome back to a special edition of Put 'em on the Couch. I'm Jason McCoy, your host, joined here by my friend, colleague, and better half,
Nelson Beaulieu.
Today we thought we would do something a little bit differently. We thought we would bring you a live, okay, not live, Nelson, but raw audio.
It's raw. It's in the moment.
A brainstorm, a coffee session. We've got some special guests that may join us during this episode.
They're not necessary.
But this is
with
experimental
this brain
in
power.
the sense that we're not going to edit. We're not going to script in any way, shape, form, or fashion this episode. I'm not going to cut out any blips, blurbs, extraneous
Swears.
noises. Right. I just want to give our listeners a taste of the process that Nelson and I undergo when we're brainstorming and thinking about future episodes.
Do we call this a creative process?
This is a creative process. And keep in mind, this is a step or two removed from planning a show. Like, this is literally a brainstorm, right?
Yeah.
What we'll talk about today, we may or may not have an idea about, but certainly what we talk about today may or may not end up in a future show.
Well, let me pull back the curtain a little bit. I have been thinking, and we've been, sort of discussing a little bit this idea of the Constitution,
Sure,
and somehow
we've been talking
putting
a little
the
bit about this for
Constitution.
the past couple of years, haven't we?
Yeah.
Sitting right here on the couch,
Yes.
oddly enough, having coffee,
Yes.
kind of just bantering back and forth.
And maybe it's because of that, and definitely coupled with external events. But I am becoming more and more convinced that the Constitution, our system of checks and balances, all of the things, the norms that go into American-style democracy, they are imperiled by that same document. That document is actually one of the greatest threats to American-style democracy.
So you believe, Nelson, that the document itself, for all of its strengths, and maybe because of some of its strengths, is the very sort of thing that might be putting our democracy in jeopardy.
Yes.
Explain that.
So much of our system of laws is really norms. Right? And I'm just going to give you some examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
So President Trump is talking often, and he's being very clear and deliberate, speaking with intentionality, about what a second Trump term looks like.
Sure.
And let's just take one branch of the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be the Department of Justice.
Okay.
By norm, that department has always operated with a certain degree of independence, right? Because obviously it's not a good idea to have a president direct a Justice Department to investigate X, Y, or Z.
Right. Now, when you say a certain degree of independence, you don't mean completely independent, right? Like
Of course
Reagan or George Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, or the other Bush. It obviously your judicial arm is going to be in some way, shape, form an extension of you, right? Your politics, your
100%.
priorities, right?
100%.
When John Ashcroft, who was the last Bush's attorney general, right?
Yeah.
Wanted to censor things. He wanted to put a cloak over the naked body in the Supreme Court or whatever, or in the halls of justice, wherever that was. I can't remember. I mean, he probably thought he was doing good by his president.
Sure.
But it's doubtful that his president said, "Hey, John, you need to really go hard after pornography or go hard after, salacious images."
Well, to give you an example of that exact...
Or go lock up this pornographer.
Right. And to give you an example of that exact attorney general, there was an instance when there was a disagreement between Attorney General Ashcroft.
Yeah.
It's Ashcroft. And Deputy Attorney General James Comey.
Oh, yeah.
And this question about enhanced interrogation, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. Ashcroft was sick, right? Mm-hmm. And the Bush administration really wanted to get this memorandum okayed by the Department of Justice. Mm. And Ashcroft had said no and then had a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And so
he becomes...
Cheney and an aide went to Ashcroft's bedside and said, we really need this to happen. We need this. The Deputy Attorney General, who at that time, James Comey, was the acting AG, heard that they were
Original
going there.
gangster.
They went. They went with the FBI director, and they pushed back. And they said, "Look, the Attorney General's in no condition to serve as Attorney General right now." And Ashcroft said, "Look, I told you what I thought. I disagreed with this memorandum, but that's not important right now. What is important is that you are not talking to the Attorney General." And James Comey, is in the room at that point. He points to James Comey. He says, "That man right there is now the acting Attorney General, and that's the person you have to talk to about this."
Oh, wow.
And so you had this incredible scene where, yes, they're all on the same team. I mean, Ashcroft was appointed by Bush.
Mm-hmm.
But that Attorney General said, "No, you can't do this." The Department of Justice is staffed with lawyers and professionals who are supposed to be able to push back against the wishes of a president. Say, "No, I'm sorry, but that's all norms." Our Constitution has set up...
That's based on the way it's always been, in other words, right?
Right.
When you say
but our
norm,
Constitution
you mean,
allows for a president to certainly be more bold, right?
as we're starting to see now, right?
As we're
I
starting...
mean, there is some debate, and I think that's a good thing, healthy debate, about how far the presidential powers go.
Right.
But you're saying that based upon standards, norms, the way it's always been, there's been a separation of sorts.
Of sorts.
And not just between the president and his judicial arm, but
so many arms.
so many arms,
So
right?
many
All of them,
arms.
basically.
So many arms.
Even,
So take something
wouldn't you
like...
say even the military to some extent?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we don't swear an oath to a president. We swear
Right.
an oath to a constitution, right?
And while
For
it
that very
has held
reason.
up, right, while these norms have held up barely, I think particularly about the time Trump went out into
They
an
will
American
not.
street
They
and held
will
the Bible
not
upside
hold
down.
up in a second Trump term.
They held
will
up,
not.
sort of, kind of. We were buzzing protesters with helicopters, but no one got shot. Right? It wasn't like a bloody
You
day.
will see a vastly different Trump
And that's the concern,
in his
right?
second term. Right?
And so
Trump keeps
how is it that the Constitution is to blame then, exactly, Nelson? Or how is it that the Constitution is
in a
partly
number of
responsible?
in a number of ways.
Okay.
First, it is very limited in its scope and its particulars. Right? I mean, it's 4,400 words long.
Okay.
It's the shortest governing document anywhere in the entire world.
On purpose.
On purpose, right? And that's obviously by design. You can't think of every single possible, outcome that a constitution's going to need for.
I mean, as imaginative and as smart as the founders were, they could never have anticipated everything that we're going to face as a country.
It's an honor system.
Right.
And when you put somebody devoid of honor into a position of power, you are asking
So
for
these
that
mores,
system to
these
be
standards,
stretched.
these norms, as you refer to them, did the founding fathers speak about these? Did they mention the concept of a norm?
I think they were kind of just understood. I think that
Kind of unwritten rule. It's a gentleman's agreement.
this is the Enlightenment era, right? Where, I mean, to be enlightened
Means do the right thing.
It wasn't just in thought and philosophy, but in behavior and attitude as well. And we expected people to comport themselves. I mean, George Washington wrote a book on 99 rules of humility and civility or something. He wrote a book about manners.
So maybe that's why you've got to be 35 to be the president of the United States. Is the brain's got to be kicking on all cylinders, and for men at least, it's about the time when the frontal lobe's completely, fully wired, and so you can trust that a person is capable of leading with the maturity requisite of a person who holds that high office.
Look, I don't really think that the founding fathers were aware of when the prefrontal development in adult.
No, but they were aware of the connection between wisdom, leadership,
Sure.
maturity.
Sure.
Perhaps they should have put a bookend on that. Perhaps they should have said nobody over 65, in case someone with Alzheimer's or some kind of cognitive decline, or someone who'd been drinking themselves into oblivion their whole life.
Yeah, look, the founding fathers weren't worried about themselves.
No.
And the document, and I want to point this out, since the recession in 2008, in European democracies, Western democracies, all over the world, you see a rise in right-wing, hard-right, populist parties gaining seats.
By the way, I don't like that term populism. I know it has a different meaning than most people think it does, but when I think of someone popular, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And I think that confuses some people who maybe don't know the use of that term in a political context. Can we just back up and unpack that a little bit? What is populism? I hear that a lot, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners hear that. First of all, what is it? And secondly, why is it necessarily associated with right-wing politics?
Populism is a brand of politics that focuses on basically, I mean, to put it simplistically, what is popular?
Or feelings, perhaps.
What feels
right,
popular? And so, like, you can think of populist parties in the United States, like the Know Nothing parties of the 1850s, hardline anti-immigrant parties, who catered to the whims of a majority group.
So, what keeps the whims of the majority from ruling if populism is allowed to spread, man?
So this is so interesting because our founders were so concerned about populist leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were concerned about the tyranny of the majority. In the 1780s and 1790s, what would this have looked like? Well, it would have looked like the many, the masses,
right,
voting themselves, and Madison mentions this in several Federalist papers, voting themselves largesse from the few. And who were the few, right? The Madisons, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the landed gentry, the people with means. And so in the United States, they set up a system to prevent that type of leader from emerging.
And what was that?
It was a system that empowered the minorities, the smaller groups, and allowed them a mechanism to gain more power than they otherwise might.
Give me a specific example of that. You're talking about, is that in the Constitution? Are you back to norms again?
It's absolutely in the Constitution. It's in the Constitution in several places. You can see it in the Electoral College.
Okay.
Right? So in the Electoral College, which is, the body that's technically responsible for selecting the president, small states are given an outsized power when it comes to selecting the president.
Based upon the number of people in their population.
Exactly.
So you can't expect.
So how does that work in reality? And it's also in the Senate, which you can't really separate the Electoral College and the Senate in this context. So during the founding period, there was obviously a big debate about representation, right? Okay. There were several debates about representation, and two of the most notable compromises came with the makeup of the Senate, and then, of course, again, empowering the southern states with the 3/5 compromise, right, which counted the slave population as 3/5 of the white population.
Okay.
So it would you're familiar with the compromise.
Yes, sure.
So with regards to the Senate, the small states were really concerned that they were going to be dominated in this new government.
Sure.
And there was one guy in Delaware, a state
Joe
delegate.
Biden.
No, a state delegate from the state of Delaware who actually stood up during the convention and he said, listen.
Bernie Sanders.
No. Okay. He's from Vermont. He said, listen, here's the deal. If you guys keep pushing this, if you keep James Madison, this idea of a population distribution in the Senate, just the way you have it in the House, of a Senate made up of population or based on population, keep it up and we will leave the United States and we will join a French ally or a Spanish ally. We will not be part of the United States. We will leave this empire. This is Delaware.
So you guys living in Delaware who listen to us, all six of you, you'd be eating crawfish etouffee and escargot right now.
It's not the worst thing in the world.
No, not the worst.
I'm not saying it was a bad idea. I'm saying that's what it was. And in order to prevent, and you have to understand, this was a possibility. Like today, we couldn't imagine it, right? Unless you go watch the movie Civil War.
There's not a whole lot I can't imagine today. And honestly, I get nervous because I don't know the difference between my imagination just running wild with me and me just being ignorant. I'm worried that the line between like conspiratorial thinking and what could actually happen if we don't get our butts in gear and do something about where our country is going is getting thinner and thinner.
Well, look, I'm not hysterical.
No, you're not there yet.
We need to start to realize that these things that we imagine, these things that some people might refer to as fanfic, this stuff can happen.
And it's precisely because these are norms, these are guardrails, these are assuming that people are good faith actors, assuming people appreciate and respect precedent or history or legacy.
And because we are a republic, we are different than these other Western democracies.
So we thought, right?
No, we are. We are absolutely
from a psychological
republic.
perspective, I guess I could make the case that we're all made in the same image of our ancestors, all made in the same image maybe of God if you're a believer, right? And that to that extent, it's not surprising that some of us, many of us, most of us might go rogue from time to time if the right set of circumstances arise, right? If you get the right just set of circumstances. I don't know what those circumstances are. I haven't studied.
Well, I think our Constitution provides, it's part of a perfect storm right now. It is part of a perfect storm because from the 1800s on, after Jefferson's glorious, bloodless revolution and his election victory in 1800, we had 3 consecutive presidents, all from Virginia, all elected to 2-year terms. Factionalism was sort of dying out, although it was definitely coming back at the tail end.
Factionalism?
We had 2 parties in 1800. Obviously, we had the Federalists, and then you had the Democratic Republicans.
Okay.
This is America's first party system.
This is when Democrats acted like Republicans do now, and Republicans acted like Democrats.
Very important to separate the ideas of these other parties and the names of these other parties from our modern parties.
Right.
Not at all similar.
But the idea is there were
what I would say is that the Federalists,
parties.
2 very distinct parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Yeah. And in 1800, Democratic Republicans sweep the presidency. They get the White House or the executive branch. As I said, they get the House and the Senate. And the Federalist Party never regains power. So they start to die out by 1815 after the victory in the War of 1812. They're gone.
Yeah.
And so you have what's known in American political history as the era of good feelings. It's just one party. What could be nicer than that? In 1820...
everybody wants the same thing, allegedly.
In 1820, Monroe runs for the presidency unopposed. So one person in the Electoral College actually votes for John Quincy Adams.
Joe Biden.
No, I don't know who it was. But one person votes for John Quincy Adams. I think just to make sure that no president besides Washington had been elected unanimously.
One party, huh?
One party, yeah. But cracks were beginning to develop in the system. There were definitely sectional differences, and by the time you get to the election of 1824 with JQA, you clearly had
That's John Quincy Adams.
Yes, and everybody's a Democratic Republican still on that slate. There's 4 candidates, but they're all very, very different. They're from different areas of the country, and it's clear that a second party system is developing with John Quincy Adams. He's a Democratic Republican. So is Andrew Jackson. But Jackson's going to break off after he loses, and it's a close election in 1824. So what does he do? In 1824, Jackson wins the most electoral votes, and he wins the most popular votes. But there's still a system where a lot of state legislatures are just picking the electors. It's not really a popular vote in each state. Jackson is determined that doesn't happen again, and his supporters go out on a campaign to make sure that they enfranchise as many people as possible, and that those votes are going to determine the presidency. And this is the first election in American history, 1828, where the votes in the presidency determine what happens in the Electoral College. So this is a popular election, and it really empowers the presidency. Because this now becomes the only office in the country that every American who can vote
has a say in.
Yeah. And so what does that do, right? It's why we count the popular votes, is because the power of the presidency is what it is in the Constitution. It doesn't change based on popular opinion. But certainly you'd agree, if you win by 15 points and get every Electoral College vote, you're a more powerful president, right?
Sure.
You have a popular will, a popular mandate from the people. So ever since 1824, really, we've democratized. We've enfranchised African Americans. We enfranchised women. We have the direct election of senators with the 17th Amendment. Every move that the country has made, then you have the Civil Rights era amendments. Every move that the country has made since really 1800 has been toward broader popular democracy. But we still have a system set up where we're a republic.
Yeah.
And so there's a misunderstanding of how we see ourselves, which is as a democracy, and our government, which is a republic. And this is why our minority population, right? And what I mean is our white, rural, conservative political minority. I'm not talking about our African American minority.
Right.
So
the voting minority.
Those states that make up that demographic have a huge outsized influence and an outsized power.
For instance,
that they would never have. So
South Carolina,
Georgia. The most powerful state to vote for president in is Wyoming.
How about that?
And it's
they've got what, 1 million people? Not even
580,000 people.
580,000 people.
So when the Constitution was ratified,
and 2 senators.
When the Constitution was ratified in 1788, the smallest state by population was Rhode Island, and the largest state was Virginia, right?
And their populations were pretty close, I bet.
Virginia
by today's standards.
Virginia was about 12 times as large as.
What's California today compared to Wyoming?
88 times.
88 times.
88 times.
Yeah.
So it's way out of balance. Here's something that's going to blow your mind. You ready for this? By 2040, 50%, 52% of the population will live in just 15 states.
Yeah.
Those 15 states will select 30 senators.
Sure.
The other half of our population get to pick 70. And again, these states are disproportionately rural, white, and conservative compared to the country
by the way,
at large.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're not saying there's anything wrong with being rural. We're not saying there's anything wrong with being white per se, and there's nothing wrong with being
it's just
Southern.
that because of our system, they have an outsized power.
They do represent a subsection of the population, and what Nelson you're saying is that they're going to be given an outsized amount of power.
Absolutely.
Now, for those that really don't understand what the Senate does, which I have to admit, ladies and gentlemen, since I guess Mitch McConnell has been the leader, very few people could ever imagine.
He's not the leader now.
Yeah, but since he's been, very few of us could understand what the Senate does. When people say the Senate, in Wyoming has an outsized amount of power. There's 2 senators in Wyoming versus 2 in California. Well, what's the big deal? Who cares?
Right now.
Explain how that works. Take it to its logical conclusion, I guess.
Right now, because we have the filibuster.
Okay.
Right, which says you have to get, filibuster is a complicated parliamentary procedure, but basically what it says is in the Senate, in order for legislation to pass, except there's like a
couple of exceptions.
Yeah, there's a couple of exceptions. Like at the beginning of the term, you can, pass certain budgetary bills with different parliamentary moves.
Right. But to stop a filibuster
through reconciliation, but to stop a filibuster, you need 60 votes.
Which is basically a mechanism that allows you to slow down or maybe stop legislation from moving forward.
You need 60 votes.
You need 60 votes. Okay.
So what you could do is you could get the 20 smallest populated states, representing 12% of the population of the United States. And if they banded together with their senators, they could theoretically stop all legislation from passing the Senate.
And that doesn't seem too far-fetched. It seems like in some ways that kind of thing
it's happening.
Has happened and, again, already does happen.
It's norms. We didn't used to filibuster everything just because we could, and that really started during the some in the Clinton administration, more in the Bush administration, and a whole hell of a lot in the Biden and Trump administrations. Right. Non-stop cloture votes, non-stop filibusters. Filibusters on motions to proceed.
Can't filibuster judicial appointments either, can you? Nominations.
Not anymore. No, they got rid of that.
So let's turn to the executive branch a bit. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 3 branches of government. I know that from Schoolhouse Rock.
Did you like Schoolhouse Rock?
I did. Gave me enough information.
I hated that.
It gave me enough information to feel good about myself, but unfortunately, I haven't learned very much since. So that's why I've got to ask this question: when people say presidential powers are limited or should be limited, or there's been an expansion of presidential powers. What does this mean, and why should I care?
So in the 1970s, after Nixon fell, there was a generalized movement within the country within the Conservative Party, within the Republican Party, to expand the powers of the presidency. This was at a time in the 1980s. Reagan came to power, and the courts were liberal, and the Congress was in Democratic hands and would remain so until the contract with America in 1994, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea was,
That's
okay,
Newt
with a
Gingrich
unitary executive, like the president needs to be as bold in person and practice as he possibly can be. The Congress had set up, and the court had said, yeah, this is okay, certain agencies that operated with executive authority under the executive branch, but sort of independent of the executive.
Okay.
So think of something like the FDA.
All right.
Where it's quasi-independent.
As it should be, right? We all assume it should
of course. Be. The FCC, right?
Yeah. If I'm a president and I've got stock in a particular pharmaceutical company,
right,
I shouldn't be able to call up the director of the FDA and say, hey, you need to push this through.
Exactly.
That would undermine the safety and health of 350 to 400 million Americans.
Or think about the Fed. The Congress has set up these agencies and given them this authority, and the Supreme Court has said, yes, that is okay, right? Mm-hmm. Now, think back to the election of 2020 where President Trump was really pushing the Fed chair. Hey,
to raise or lower
interest rates, right? We got an election in 4 months. Jerome Powell, I think
it was.
Yes. Lower them.
Yeah, we'd never heard a president come out and speak so candidly, so loudly, never used the bully pulpit and speak to all Americans.
So imagine a situation now where the president Schedule Fs all of these federal employees. Right now, there's about 50,000 federal employees at these various agencies, and they operate with, they operate outside of the president's purview. They're not political appointees.
Right.
Okay. And this is what Trump perceives as the deep state. The people who are going to push back and tell him, no, sir, you can't do that.
These
no,
career
sir.
professionals, as they're called.
These experts, because they've been there for a long time and they've gained insight and
expertise. And they do their job and have been doing their job sometimes 20, 30, 40 years.
So imagine an FDA.
Without any fanfare, without any event, haven't they?
Imagine an FDA where these 50,000 employees right now who operate as experts are told you're a political appointee, and the president's desire is to see the abortion drug mifepristone pulled from the market. Mm-hmm. Imagine an FCC where the president says, well, you're now a political appointee, and that article that was just written that Comcast, the New York Times, CNN put out, I want to punish them. I want to close off their airways because that was a mean article and that's not appropriate.
Same way with the IRS, right? You could have the IRS.
Is this allowed? Well, it will ultimately come before the Supreme Court, but the court has shown itself to be very pliant and very interested in this idea of the independent executive theory. This is going to happen. And I'm not being histrionic, as I said. This is the President of the United States promising these things are going to happen, telegraphing, telling you this is what the new regime is. So I am your retribution.
He wants to push things beyond the standards and the norms, right?
Yes, and one thing, and now when you bring it back to the other branch, the third branch, the legislative branch, the president, when he left office, after the second impeachment, made it his mission to get rid of disloyal people out of the Republican Party, totally remake it or finish remaking it in his image. A lot of people said they were interested in voting for a second impeachment. Do you know why some of them didn't? Some of those senators refused to. This is according to Mitt Romney. I think Liz Cheney said this.
They were afraid they
were afraid for their personal safety.
Yeah, be held.
Not their political careers. Right. They were afraid for their physical safety. Yep. And that's where we are. And to pretend otherwise is to just keep whistling past the graveyard.
Yeah.
This is, and again, it's allowed. I mean, I don't know what the court will say. I think there's a strong argument to be made that Congress has a role to play and has a right to set up the agencies independently as they've done. But
how would you respond to the critics, the people who say, for democracy to stand, for it to continue, for it to flourish, you've got to hold everyone, including maybe particularly the president, to account. And yet, we see time and time again, just with this Stormy Daniels hush money case that is now being tried, President Trump violating the gag order, not once, not twice, but maybe a dozen times or more. What do you say to those people that say, listen, why isn't the judge locking him up? Or at least why isn't the judge fining him that minimum $1,000 a day? Why isn't the judge saying something? I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, you don't want to feed the beast and give him any more energy and give him any more fodder for fundraising, because he's already using that, I'm aggrieved, they're after me, there's the deep state, I don't get a fair shake. But at the same time, you just said it yourself, norms do matter. Standards do matter. The way we've always done it does matter. I mean, how do you convince
what I would say is that the
normies out there that the center can hold if they're seeing two systems of justice?
Well, what I would say is that Judge Merchan in the New York case is in an impossible situation.
And yet he's a judge.
Yeah.
He represents the third arm of government, the judicial arm, which even more so than the
that's not
FBI and IRS should be removed.
To an extent that you have to, I mean, this is a state court, so it's not really constitutional in the sense of the document we're discussing. I mean, of course, it's constitutional.
Right.
Because states,
they do take an oath to the Constitution as judges.
Of course. So, but I'm far less interested in that and far more concerned about the arguments made in the Trump immunity case at the Supreme Court, where the president is saying absolute immunity, 100%.
No matter what I've done.
No matter what I've done.
No matter what I will do.
Yes. Absolute immunity. And we are, think about what we're doing.
Has any American president or office holder at the national level ever been so bold, ever been so brazen?
No. That is antithetical to the history and traditions of the United States. It's not, it's just, it can't be. It can't be true. If what is alleged by Jack Smith, special prosecutor in the January 6th indictment, if we assume that that's true, and in a hearing like the one we had at the Supreme Court, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to, because those arguments that it's not true, those are for trial.
Right.
When we're discussing whether or not it can go forward, let's assume it's all true.
Yep.
A president tried to maintain power after being voted out of office.
Right.
He did so by using his professional office through illegal means. He did so. And the question is that okay? And we're even discussing it.
Not just is that okay, but could he have gone further? I mean, compared to what he's suggesting that he will do if he ever gets back into office.
Well, this is why the case becomes
right?
This is why the case becomes very, very important. Is a president immune? I can't even believe if a student of mine made the case that presidents have full immunity from prosecution, I would fail them.
And yet, that is the question that sits at the foot of the Supreme Court.
They're taking it seriously. They're actually considering it. And just
considering taking it up, you mean?
They've taken it up. They heard it. And just having that conversation, to me, is dangerous.
Help me understand, what are the ways that the Supreme Court can rule on that?
Well, they can.
And what are the implications for all of those ways?
They can remand the case back to the district court.
Which would mean what?
I think what they're going to end up doing is saying, look, yes, presidents have some immunity for official acts. You,
Draw the
district
line.
Court, need to decide, along with the prosecution, what you want to charge, what might be official, what might be unofficial, what might be private, and then figure out how the case proceeds, which will take up way too much time.
So you guys figure out what it is, what the line is.
If that's what they do, the case will never be.
We're not going to give you a line. So the Supreme Court, you don't think the Supreme Court's ever going to say, listen, the president has full immunity, do whatever he wants or she wants?
I don't think so.
And another thing don't think will happen is they would say, let's rule on where the line is. In this case, President Trump did not go over the line. Here's the line. If he or anyone in the future go...
They don't need to create a line with this case. What they should do so the case can proceed and the American people can get an answer before the election...
Can we prosecute it?
It's just simply, are these official acts that are protected? They cannot be. They simply
the rule setter.
If they are protected acts, if what the president did is not protected or is if he's immune from prosecution for what he is alleged to have done, that just can't be. You can't have a democracy.
Does precedent not matter in this case? I mean, do not the Supreme Court look at things that have happened in the past concerning the president?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Like, I'm thinking of Nixon again.
Yeah,
Nixon was caught pretty much red-handed, his operatives at least, breaking into Watergate, the hotel.
Watergate Hotel, yeah.
Yeah. And trying to basically spy and take information from Democrats. And
the plumbers.
And he basically said, I'm going to resign. Again, he was pressured because his party came to him and said, party leadership came to him, right, and said, they're going to impeach
Barry
you.
Barry Goldwater came to him and said, he said, Mr. President, or he said, how's it looking in the Senate? And he said, well, you have 4 votes. And one of them is not mine.
Oh, okay.
So he's like, I better resign.
So would the Supreme Court not look at that? That's not considered a precedent, I guess?
Well, the case went, to the Supreme Court, Nixon, v. United States. And Nixon
lost, right?
Nixon said, I have executive privilege. And the Supreme Court said, well, yes, that's true, but you don't have it when you're being investigated for a crime. The publics need to know. In this instance, supersede your right to any executive privilege.
And so how does that...
Well, a lot of the justices think that, Nixon was wrongly decided.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they...
On the right, Nixon is really enjoying a
sort of ignoring that precedent, or don't think that precedent necessarily was
Well, courts... And again, this is another norm. Courts are supposed to follow precedent. Of course they can, as they did with the Dobbs decision, they can go in another direction if they think a case was wrong. Or in a lighter note, in Brown versus Board, right, overruling Plessy. So, it's this is a very, very conservative court,
and the very consequential decision coming up.
They have many of them. But yeah, this one.
But you dare say that's one of the biggest ones in your lifetime.
For certain.
And I thought the Citizens United case was a big one. I thought the one about Obama and his Obamacare was a big one. But
they were.
Man, this one does seem existentially heavier than all of those put together, unfortunately.
Well, it's a shame that we're at this point. Well, it's a shame that we're here.
I remember President Trump, then candidate Trump, saying on camera, my people love me so much, I'm so popular, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and get away with it. And people thought, this man's crazy. First of all, who's ever going to vote for someone that says that out loud? And secondly, even if you're joking, I know you like to claim locker room talk as your excuse for everything vile, but man, that seemed out of bounds. And yet here we are.
In the first Trump term, you heard people say things like, oh, man, I love his policies. I do wish he was a little nicer. And what you're seeing now and what, first
you can't just hold your nose now.
I think we've become so numb to the behavior that people say, no, you're missing it. It's not the policies. It's all about the personality.
Yeah, and he's not being metaphorical.
Strength.
You gotta take him at his word now.
Well,
because maybe the first time he said it, you could be excused for holding your nose because you didn't really believe it. But now that this man has shown you who he is, he's shown you who he's continuing to be.
Well, he just really believes that and his followers believe that there is an existential battle for the soul of the nation, and you need a Trump. You need somebody who is strong, who gains power, returns the power, and uses power to crush the enemy.
I'm all for returning power to the people, but to me, returning power to people looks different than what it looks like maybe to some of my contemporaries. When I think about a leader coming to power and returning that power to the people, I think about a leader who pushes collective bargaining, collective action. I think about a leader who will give the people more rights, not fewer rights. Give the people more opportunities to grieve, not fewer opportunities to grieve. What do you think about that? Why do so many people, it seems, contemporaries of yours and mine, seem to want their freedoms limited? Do they not see that as limiting?
I don't think they understand
the implications.
I don't think they understand the threats.
A strong
because
man
I don't think most people understand how our government works.
No, but most people have heard things about history. They've heard about despots and authoritarians.
We survived a Trump term. I don't think people believe.
Yeah, but how many million Jews didn't survive Nazi Germany? How many?
I don't think people believe that the threat is. I don't think people really think.
So the gallows that were
the Insurrection Act,
the gallows that were constructed outside the Capitol, right, and the chance to hang Mike Pence. People seeing and hearing that didn't really believe that if those people who'd gone in, the insurrectionists had gone in and found Mike Pence, they don't believe they would have pulled him limb to limb.
That behavior has been normalized, and the individuals who perpetrated those crimes have been martyred. They have been idolized and canonized in the Trump gospel. Every Trump rally has them singing "God Bless America" or I don't know, maybe it's the national anthem. The January 6th choir, they're being promised they're going to be released.
Here, Nelson? How do we get here? So angry, so bloodthirsty, so absolutely immune from compromise or negotiation. We get back to this idea that, oddly enough, strangely enough, the thing that guides us and has ensured that our center has held for so long, this Constitution that we have canonized and we've fetishized and we've romanticized, you're saying that maybe it's to blame. Could you make the case that the Constitution itself has allowed for this kind of deep political polarization, this anger, this wealth inequality, this...
No. It hasn't allowed for those things. Those things were developed. What I will say is that our system is unique compared to other Western democracies because it is a republic and because the majority vote getter doesn't always... if you didn't have the Electoral College, you wouldn't have President Trump.
True.
If you didn't have the Electoral College, you wouldn't have a conservative Supreme Court.
But you also arguably wouldn't have the same level of freedom, right? You wouldn't have the same level of checks and balances without the Electoral College.
No, I disagree.
You and I might say, hey, we don't need the Electoral College because the person that we want to be in office has historically or always maybe received the most popular votes.
Yeah, let's see. So since 1992, Republicans have won. Well, let's just do 2000, this century. Republicans have won the popular vote one time in this century,
and they've won the presidency at least 4.
They've had 12 years, and Biden will finish out his first term, and that'll be 12 years. But
you were saying from 2000.
Yeah, they've won the popular vote one time, but had as of 2020,
that was
20 years.
Was George W. Bush, right?
Yeah, they had 12 years of power to 8. They had the presidency for 12 years of power to 8. So that is problematic as we have democratized because I think it keeps people away from politics. It makes them feel like there's no efficacy, there's no power in their voice. And you have a system, the only system that I'm aware of in the West, where the party that doesn't receive the most votes can win and does win.
Well, I don't want to get into a debate about the importance or lack of importance of a electoral college, but I will say there is nothing that keeps the popular vote from swinging the other way. I mean, if you can control the airwaves, if you can control, we don't have a printing press so much anymore, but if you can control the internet, right? If you can control social media, if you can control the Federal Communications Department, FCC, then, I mean, you could get your word and only your word out. So, I worry, Nelson, that even if we didn't have an electoral college and someone like President Trump gets in for a second term, who's to say he won't rule with an iron fist, dissolve, or basically install someone over the FCC that will, again, only allow Trump TV to play 24/7. I mean, look, it took Fox News just a handful of years to basically zombify, I'd argue, maybe a third of the population.
So I never thought I think you're missing,
anyone would ever take the National Enquirer or Fox News that seriously.
I think you're missing the threat or overstating it. I think the real threat is the chilling effect that it will have on entities like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN.
Right.
That you couldn't have in our country because you have a court system, right? So I don't think you could have just Trump TV. That's not the threat. That's not.
But
authoritarianism.
If you have the New York Times and they now start to worry that they're going to be imprisoned.
There you go. That's the threat. You couldn't have, okay, just as a for instance, you can have a president prosecute his political opponents, certainly, or investigate and then prosecute, but we still have a jury. So we have more checks and balances that we can go through, we can establish.
President Trump has little to no official power right now, and yet he is seemingly brazen enough to put pressure on these jurors right now, violating this gag order daily. And again, like we said, the judge is really in a sticky position, but it's his courtroom, and yet he's not done anything about it. What are these jurors to think? I mean, he's already putting pressure on those jurors. He's already got to be making those jurors anxious. They're sitting there staring at an unhinged former president who has wielded his power before and after office in a way that arguably no other official for the United States government ever has, at least in my lifetime. And yet we're supposed to believe that these jurors are going to save us. I mean, it's not that big a deal maybe in the Stormy Daniels hush money case, because even if he's found guilty, he's not going to go to jail.
No, I don't think so.
This is a civil trial, right?
No, it's a criminal trial.
It's a felony trial,
but I would be surprised to see that.
It feels kind of civil to me almost. But in the future, right, some of these future trials, if they were able to come to trial before the election, which I don't think they will. I think they'll be
so you bring up a really good point.
I worry about what could you ever get a juror that would be honest? Would they be brave enough? Again,
no idea.
Where have all the cowboys gone, right? Like, there doesn't seem to be anyone brave anymore. I mean, there's a lot of women out there that are brave. I will say that. Liz Cheney and quite a few women. But, man,
I think that's the problem.
The men don't seem very brave, man. They seem neutered.
Because the Constitution is so limited, and because what is happening and what has happened is technically legal.
Yeah.
Right? You get these people who still act as, it's just a different way. It's just, and they don't speak up. They don't stand up for democracy.
Yeah, we're talking about you, Bill Barr. We're talking about you.
There you go. Yeah. Well, Liz Cheney said, and I thought it was such a good quote. She said, "There will come a time when President Trump is dead and gone."
That's right.
But what you do and what you say in these moments,
will linger.
Will live forever.
That's right.
And history.
President Trump will be a page or two in the history books.
Well, history will judge people's actions. And unfortunately, just based on the way these trials have been slow-walked,
right,
history, as it often is, might be the only judge.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember Mitch McConnell standing on the floor after, January 6th and saying, this is inappropriate and I'm blaming President Trump for this. I'm not going to remember Chris Sununu a year ago talking about how he would never vote for Trump. He wouldn't vote for Biden either, but he's not going to vote for Trump. I mean, I wouldn't remember these people then. I'm going to remember them now. And I think that's what you're saying. History's going to remember that they not only did nothing, not only are they complicit, but they're actually out there cheerleading and helping Trump raise money and basically apologizing.
Yeah.
Apologizing. Chris Sununu, when asked just the other night, are you going to vote for Trump? Despite the fact that you sit here on this show a year ago and said, absolutely you couldn't, you have integrity, and he said, yeah, I'm going to vote for Trump, along with 51% of America. God, I hope 51% of America doesn't vote for Trump. I hope they get sick, stay home, get a brain tumor overnight, sleep late, the whole day.
I want to be clear. First of all, I hold absolutely no animosity whatsoever toward President Trump. None.
Oh, wow.
None. Second,
you're a bigger man than I am.
Second,
because I don't want to tell you what I fantasize or daydream about every day.
Well, second, what I would say is the people who support the president, the people who vote for the president, the vast majority of them, I mean, this is just a personal thing. I don't really like sticking crap all over my truck or anything like that. But the vast majority of people who live their lives day in and day out, go to work, do the right thing, obey the law, would give you the shirt off their back, salt of the earth types, all these people. I don't blame them for any decision that they may or may not make.
They know no better.
Oh, it's not that they don't know any better. It's just that people
Because I believe if they know better, Nelson, if they know better, then I can't help but to blame them.
Well, I don't.
If they know better.
And I think it's easy to talk. When your leaders are telling you that this is legal, this is fine, I don't blame people for their vote. I don't get mad at their vote. I respect their vote. Totally get that. That's fine. That's a democracy, right? The reason I am speaking about this topic and the reason I'm speaking in the terms I'm speaking of is this isn't imaginary. The president is telling you this is what's going to happen.
Right.
That is what he is being clear. I am not projecting anything. I'm telling you that this is what the president is saying and this is what it means. This is what it looks like. Point one. Point two, and this is most important to me. The President of the United States lost a free and fair election. That is a fact. That is a fact. Mm-hmm. He lost a free and fair election. He tried to pressure state and local officials to come up with a scheme to maintain power. That happened. And that is just completely and totally unacceptable to me, personally. And to pretend that it didn't happen is really what bothers me. So to the extent that I'm upset, or if I seem upset, it's because people are trying to pretend, that didn't happen. Don't believe your lying eyes. And we can't do that. We can't say it didn't happen or it wasn't that big a deal, because it did happen. And it's so foundational and fundamental to what it means to be a democracy.
Well, you heard it here first. This is Morning Coffee Time with Nelson Beaulieu and Jason McCoy. You've been listening to a very special episode of Put 'em on the Couch today. Just thought we would do something a little bit different this hour. And if you notice a difference in our tone, again, in the quality of the audio itself, in the sort of the way the message is being presented, the topic, you can believe
Put 'em on the couch raw.
We are absolutely giving it to you raw, uncut, unfiltered. We did not plan this today. This is something we're going to try to do maybe every week. It may not always be an hour. It may not always be released at the exact same time, but it's definitely something we've thought about for a while now, recording ourselves and our morning musings. Sometimes it will absolutely come out like a stream of consciousness. Hopefully this one didn't. Hopefully it was a little more organized. I think Nelson did a fantastic job, and I hope that if you do like this, you will let us know by downloading, liking, sharing, rating, and as always, reviewing. We do appreciate you, couch surfers, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you, Nelson, for doing this with me.
Yeah.
And thank you
guys
for
vote.
listening. Take care.